In the last three seasons, Michigan has lost a grand total of three games, but a former Alabama quarterback expects them to lose three this season. Why? Well, let's break it down. Welcome to the Point and Minute Show on Michigan football at the voice of college football, where we average one outstanding point for every minute of video. My name is Cliff. His name is Mac. Let's get into it. ESPN commentator and former Alabama quarterback Greg McElroy has some questions for Michigan going into the 2024 season. McElroy likes the defense and the secondary. He says Michigan looks solid on the D line, but on offense, you've got a lot of roster turnover, almost an entirely new offensive line, plus a question mark at the quarterback position. You've got good receivers and a good run game, he says, but with that question mark at QB, there's a worry Michigan might not be able to balance the passing game against the running game and move the ball downfield, which, as we all know, is important in football. Mac, once they have the QB figured out, what does Michigan need to do to balance the offense?
Bring balance to the offense. They have to
Yes.
bring balance to the football force. I don't know. I was listening to what's his name? Clayton Safey. Is that how you
Yes.
pronounce it?
Clayton
Okay.
Safely.
He was on Big Ten Ted. Big Ten Ted put out his Michigan season preview, which is really good. If you haven't watched that, you got to watch it. It's really good stuff. But Clayton Safey mentioned that the offense is going to kind of need to rebuild itself. Well, itself. The coaches are going to need to do it, but it's going to need to be rebuilt in the image of Alex Orji. And I think I agree with that. So Orji is a freak athlete. All right. He's an all around great player. He's got the size, the strength, the toughness. Does he have the precision of JJ McCarthy, specifically in the passing game? Does he have the zip on the ball or the arm talent in general? Fact of the matter is that we just don't really know yet. So I personally see this playing out in one of two different scenarios. Either Orji's arm is fine and Michigan continues its passing game the way it always has by heavily using the tight ends or finding some of those out routes and then saving the deep bombs for, those occasional moments or maybe just to catch Ohio State off guard. Like, yeah, we actually do throw the ball downfield. Surprise! Or scenario number two, Orji's arm really isn't that great. Okay, so what do we do? Well, Michigan's going to need to figure out a way that if he has to use his arm, not his, it's in short yardage situations. The cool thing is that if Michigan has to rely on getting into those short yardage situations, I think they now have more weapons to do that than they did even under Harbaugh. So, I mean, they have Donovan Edwards. He can run, but he can also catch out of the backfield. I feel like that was really underutilized in 2023, but we're not going to complain about it. They won a national championship. They also have Kalel Mullings. He can bulldoze his way through just about anyone. Just ask Nebraska's secondary. They have Colston Loveland, who's one of, if not the best tight ends in America. And obviously, they do have, Samaj Morgan, Tyler Morris, Samorian Walker, and CJ Charleston to offer some throwing options, receiving options, really, but, throwing options for Orji. But the cool thing is that they now have a quarterback in Alex Orji, as presumably he is going to be the starter, but he's got the size and athleticism to run RPO or just quarterback design runs. I feel like they didn't really do that as much with JJ because he wasn't as big, but Orji's a big guy. So now defenses have to worry about him just as much as, Donovan Edwards or Kalel Mullings. So, and they're also going to need to keep a man on the mismatch nightmare that is Colston Loveland as well. So Michigan's got options to get into those short yardage situations to keep the field, nice and short and continue playing the time of possession game that won them the national championship last year.
I actually like that. Something I like that. That's something I look forward to if Orji gets that starting spot. That he is a physical quarterback. So where you've got guys in the past like McCarthy or go back to Denard Robinson or Devin Gardner who would just sprint to the sides and make it out there. Orji is going to be that guy to just bulldoze through the middle and knock people over as he's getting that short yardage gain.
And he shouldn't too often.
No,
You also want him to stay healthy.
right.
At least he can take some hits.
But the threat is there.
The threat is there, yes.
That could be exciting to watch. Now McElroy sees three losses for Michigan, and it's the same three losses that basically everybody expects: Texas, Oregon, and Ohio State. But still sees 9-3 as a successful season. That's hard to say. Still sees 9-3 as a successful season for Sharon Moore. Why would 9-3 be considered successful coming off of a national championship run?
because of the turnover. Um, I can't really think of a national championship team that has had as much turnover as Michigan has, from a personnel standpoint, but also from a coaching staff standpoint. Um, yeah, I think that it was even brought up that Michigan is like the first national championship or national champion to lose their head coach
To the
immediately
NFL?
afterwards to the NFL.
Mhm.
I don't know if it's ever, but it's definitely a while. But yeah, I mean, but that's why 9-3 is successful. It's just based on who Michigan lost to the draft, and then obviously the coaching staff. Now, we who follow Michigan football a bit closer, we're looking at these games, Texas, Oregon, and Ohio State, and we're thinking, well, hey, we weren't supposed to beat Ohio State in 21 or 22. Some people even had us losing in 23, but we beat them. And we also weren't supposed to beat Alabama, but we did. Some people even thought we were going to lose to Washington, but we didn't. We beat them and won the Natty. So, yeah, I mean, conventional wisdom says that we don't win those games just based on the situation, but I still think Michigan can. They're at home against Oregon and Texas, and Ohio State still doesn't really have an answer in the trenches where the game matters most, especially with the way Michigan wants to play it. But we'll see, But even so, I mean, considering the situation, 9-3 is a very good season. If we're technically in what most people would consider a rebuilding year.
Yeah, and you figure Sharon Moore has had that battle experience too. I mean, Harbaugh's suspensions. I mean, this is how I'm looking at it. You can tell me how you look at it, but those suspensions of Harbaugh last year are actually pretty fortuitous for Sharon Moore because he got thrown into those intense battle situations. I mean, what Penn State and Ohio State and Maryland, as the head coach, just all of a sudden he's the guy who's got to make the decisions.
Mhm.
That's got to prepare him somewhat for this season, doesn't it? That's got to give him a leg up, an edge, right?
I, I I don't know because Harbaugh was still, there to help with the game plan. But from what I understand, most of the in-game situational stuff was taken care of by Sharon Moore anyway, and Harbaugh was, or at least as far as the offense was concerned. But Harbaugh was sort of the CEO that oversaw or had final say over certain decisions and stuff like that. But it sounds a lot like Sharon Moore, the coordinators in general, had a lot more in-game control than Harbaugh did, by design, obviously. But yeah, I mean,
Right.
I saw Josh Pate was saying that, what if Ryan Day and Ohio State lose to Michigan a fourth straight time, and it would be a disaster, and it absolutely would be because it. But the funny thing is that it wouldn't actually even be Sharon Moore's first win over Ohio State as head coach, which is just a
Right.
bizarre concept. So you gotta think that maybe it would help, but I don't know. I guess we'll see.
We will see. So McElroy also suggests that Michigan could end up at the Big Ten championship game with presumably that 9-3 season and lose, but still have a shot at the playoffs because of our new 12 team playoff system. But how far would you expect Michigan to go after that, given the scenario of a 9-4 season?
In the playoffs, I mean, it would depend on the matchup. I mean, obviously. So, like, to me, if Michigan loses close games to Texas, Oregon, and Ohio State, then maybe Michigan sneaks into the top 10 to 12 spot, somewhere around there, and maybe they can sneak a first round win. Especially if they're playing a potentially overrated opponent. I don't know why my brain just immediately goes to Notre Dame, but like that's who I'm thinking of right now. Is if Michigan sneaks into a 10 to 12 spot and they get matched up against Notre Dame, it's because Notre Dame won more games but had a much worse schedule and just has a talent for getting themselves into situations where they just don't belong, i.e., the 2012 national championship game. But whatever. Anyway, otherwise, I think Michigan probably shouldn't make the playoffs with 4 losses. I think that's too many. But honestly, we won't know until the season plays out because it could also depend on, in my opinion, where Penn State is, particularly in the mix in the Big Ten. So if Michigan and Penn State both end the season with 9 wins, but Penn State only has 3 losses, the question becomes: does the conference championship loss hurt Michigan more than the fact that Penn State sat home on their couches? And who knows?
Right.
I mean, this committee is still very subjective, so it'll depend on what they think of each team's schedule. and the quality of the wins. But I think if Michigan somehow made the conference championship with 3 losses, my guess is that a 4th loss would knock them out of contention.
You would assume, and I guess it depends on who the fourth loss is to. So what if well, actually, I guess the worst case scenario is Michigan plays Michigan State, or I'm sorry, Ohio State at the end of the season. Let's say they do lose to Ohio State, but that would mean Ohio State would have had to have lost another game for Michigan to then end up at the Big Ten championship. But if wow, the math here is going to drive us crazy, because for Michigan and Ohio State to then end up together at the Big Ten championship, and then one of them loses again, I think that's probably the only situation you would get to where one of them would still make it into the playoffs with potentially 4 losses. It would have to be a high level game, right? That's what I'm thinking.
High level meaning that they lost a 4th game. I mean, all of the losses would have to be to extremely quality opponents. I mean,
Right.
if Texas, Oregon, and Ohio State are 1, 2, and 3, not necessarily in that order, and Michigan lost to all 3 of them, and then happened to lose to one of them again in either Oregon or Ohio State in the Big Ten championship game,
Hmm.
then sure, maybe they could make it in. But the fact is if Michigan loses to both Oregon and Ohio State, I mean, Oregon or Ohio State are going to need to get severely upset by someone else for Michigan to still be in the mix. And at that point, Michigan and whatever other team it is would have the same number of losses. I mean,
Yeah.
depending on whatever other team, they would have the same number of losses. So that team would still have the tiebreaker against Michigan, which means that one of those teams would need to get upset again. So
Yeah.
it's a long shot. I don't think if Michigan has 3 losses, they're going to the conference championship game. I don't think if they somehow got there and lost a 4th game that they're making it into the playoffs. I just don't think that's I don't think that's happening.
Yeah, and that makes sense. If they were to lose 3 games and then did make it to the Big Ten championship, that means you've got, I mean, that means Ohio State and Oregon have lost 2 or 3 games themselves. But then one of those teams is going to have to win the Big Ten. Well, obviously, one of them is going to win it. For Michigan to be 9-3 and go into the Big Ten championship, I think you're right. They would have to win the Big Ten championship to then still be in the playoff situation.
Yeah, I mean, if a
Yeah.
3-loss Michigan team won the Big Ten championship, then yeah, they're in. I think that it's an automatic in at that point. Actually, I think conference champions get an automatic in.
Oh, I think you're right. I think you're right.
Yeah,
Yeah, the conference champions, and then the top. What is it? The top 5, and then the conference champions.
right.
I
The
believe.
the way I see it is if Michigan has 3 losses, then they better hope that Penn State also has 3 losses,
Right.
or Notre Dame also has 3 losses. Because if either Notre Dame, I can't remember Notre Dame's schedule off the top of my head, but I know for a fact Penn State's schedule is not as hard as Michigan's. So if Michigan's got 3 losses and Penn State has 3 losses, Michigan's I believe would be higher quality losses, which would give them the edge over Penn State.
Yeah,
That's what I'm thinking.
it's going to be difficult to consider this season a successful season at 9-3. Those are going to have to be some quality losses. I think we as Michigan fans are going to have to sort of settle it in our minds. What do we expect? What are we willing to see happen to Michigan this season in order for it to be considered a successful season? Because it's going to get brutal otherwise. Because 9-3 is a tough number.
Let me help real quick. If Michigan loses 3 games, and those 3 games are to Texas, Oregon, and Ohio State, and Michigan wins all of its other games, including its bowl game, this season was highly successful, and every Michigan fan should be very pleased with that. Conversation over.
Conversation over. What
That's
about making it to the first round and losing like Detroit often does?
Detroit doesn't make it to the playoffs that often.
But they lose.
I mean, okay. Honestly, I think a playoff appearance, no matter where that they lose, yeah. I think a playoff appearance for Michigan, no matter where it is and what happens, is kind of great at this point. I think that's a great start for the Sharon Moore era. I mean, I personally think that Michigan has just as much a shot at the Big Ten this year as they did last year. I mean, yes, one or two questions have to be answered, but I think it's there. But I think that if Michigan makes the playoffs at all, Michigan fans should be happy because they lost quite possibly the best Michigan football team ever to the draft and to graduation. And I mean, the amount of turnover on this roster is just insane.
Mhm.
So if they make the playoffs, and I'm not saying that to say like these new players that are starting this year, aren't nearly as good and we should not expect very much from them, because no, they have a lot of experience from last year. A lot of them actually played quite a bit last year because Michigan was blowing everybody out.
Mhm.
So, I mean, there's a lot to expect, but you've got a much more difficult schedule this year. I mean, Ohio State's obviously putting all the cards on the table, hoping that they can, keep Ryan Day in Columbus, or Ryan Day can at least save his job. I mean, that's what Michigan's going up against right now. So making the playoffs would be amazing. And people just need to keep this in perspective, considering everything that Michigan's lost.
That's what we think. What do you think? Leave a comment and let us know. If you want more great college football analysis, check out all the shows right here on Michigan Football at the Voice of College Football. You can also check Mac and I at the Big Ten Team Rivalry Show Monday nights at 8 p.m. right here on YouTube. Mac, take us out.
This is Michigan Football at the Voice of College Football.